Parents used my education fund, which I built working since I was 13, to pay for my sister's surgeries so she could glow up after her second divorce at 25. So I said fine, do what you want, and spilled all their dirty secrets to my grandparents. Now they're mad because sis can't play the victim anymore, since this is how they're choosing to spend her part of the $300,000 inheritance. Okay, you guys are not gonna believe this. Imagine dedicating your entire childhood to proving your worth, working your butt off for every single penny, only for your own father to casually ask you to hand over all your hard-earned savings. Not for your future, but to fund your spoiled sister's cosmetic surgery. Yeah, you heard that right. Cosmetic surgery. Because apparently, her being dumped twice was my problem to solve. My life, it's always been weird. I'm 18, and I come from a family that's less traditionally patriarchal and more just, well, problematic. See, all my life, I've had to face the music for being a boy. Meanwhile, my older sister, Grace, who's 25, has been absolutely drenched in love and attention. Why? Because she's the eldest, and because she's a girl. It's always been this way. I can't stand her, and honestly, she couldn't care less about me. Grace is insufferable. Seriously. There's a reason she doesn't have a single friend. Nobody outside our immediate family can tolerate her for more than 6 months. 6 months is her record for keeping a friend or even a boyfriend. And I don't blame them. Even that feels like an achievement. The worst part. She's so incredibly thick, she doesn't even understand that she's the problem. Our parents have drilled it into her head her whole life that she can do no wrong, that everyone else is against her, and she has the right to cut off anyone who doesn't treat her like a queen. Newsflash. The real world doesn't work like that. This mountain of entitlement. It all stems from our parents. They enable her completely, to the point where my younger sister, Kelsey, who's 14, and I sometimes feel like we were just decoration, like they only ever wanted one child. Thank God I have Kelsey. I love that girl more than anyone in the world, and I just want her to get out of this hellhole as soon as humanly possible. Our parents actually encourage Grace's behavior and try to get Kelsey to copy her. No way. Not on my watch. If Kelsey ends up like Grace, she won't be able to do anything in life. She's too young to be turned into a prop, and I absolutely will not let that happen to her. Thankfully, her personality is the complete opposite of Grace's, so she naturally doesn't have that queen of the house vibe. I know it's just me who can protect her from the ridiculous, dated beliefs our family clings to. From the time I was a kid, I was taught I was the man of the house, destined to take over my dad's business. It was hammered into me. Being a man meant endless responsibilities, being serious all the time, earning money, providing. That's what the men in my family did. I never knew any different. I just absorbed it. But the push to earn my own money came early. Dad said he wasn't going to hand me opportunities on a platter. Only if I could prove my worth as a man. Financially, for college, for anything, would he shell out a dime. I remember this lecture before my 11th birthday, when I asked if I could have friends over for a party. He told me I was transforming into a young man, and needed to be aware of my responsibilities, to give up this childishness. I wish I hadn't listened. But back then I didn't know any better. I picked up my first job at 13. It wasn't much, but I loved it. I started by walking dogs in the neighborhood, then moved to dog sitting. I've always loved animals, and starting so young gave me the skills, the knack, and most importantly, the patience for it. It wasn't a fortune, but it was my money. I spent some, saved most. My parents were proud, which made me proud of myself. They never asked what I did with the money or how much I made. They just checked my room regularly for dangerous things like alcohol or drugs. Never found anything because I wasn't that kind of kid. I stashed my savings, determined to use it for college. I was naive back then, thinking it would be enough. It wasn't. And I was pretty sure Dad wouldn't spend a dime anyway, since he'd already set his impossible condition. The thing with that kind of indoctrination is, I never felt worthy of Dad's money. I still don't. And this experience, it's a universe away from Grace's reality. She's faced none of these struggles. The only things ever asked of her were to look pretty and to marry well. That's it. And it was reinforced from childhood. I can't remember her ever trying hard in school, or picking up hobbies not centered around makeup or dressing up. I still remember when I was barely 10, we had to go to my dad's friend's house. Grace had a temperature. She wasn't dressed up, and my parents were aghast. To them, a normal Grace was far worse than a sick Grace. She begged them to let her skip it, but they forced her, saying it would only be for a while. I think she had it bad in her own way, which just made her insufferable instead of a decent person. They've tried to put Kelsey through the same, but I'm fighting tooth and nail to prevent it. Plus, with Grace's drama every other week, they're usually too preoccupied with her to bother much with us. The real blow-up, the one that changed everything, happened a few weeks ago. I never thought it would become something so major. I'm not complaining because after all these years, I finally feel vindicated. But it's weird having the family at each other's throats. It started because I got into one of the best universities in my state for undergrad. I was so proud of myself, and I even landed a full scholarship. No financial worries there, right? Mom and Dad were proud too. Dad actually said I'd worked hard and he was proud of me. I rarely hear those words, so they meant the world. But then, what he said next, it just completely blew my mind. He said that since I had a scholarship, I could just work and pay for my living costs. I was gutted. I'd been working since I was 13, all because I thought if I proved myself responsible, Dad would step up when it really mattered. I'd hoped my late teens would be enjoyable, after spending every other part of my youth slaving away at school or working. He claimed he'd been training me for the trials of life. Trials. I could have had a comfortable life. I was sullen for a while, but I decided to talk to Dad. I hoped he'd understand. Worst case, he'd scream at me. It didn't matter. I needed rest. I needed a break. I needed a life. I went to him and laid it all out. I reminded him I'd been working since I was a kid, only because he'd promised to help me with college if I showed him I was responsible. I didn't know how else to prove my worth. I told him I was tired, that I wanted to experience college properly, and I asked him to help with living costs. I had a good sum saved, but I explained it wouldn't cover everything. He just sighed, looked defeated. He said he knew where I was coming from, but he couldn't do much right now because Grace was going through a lot. I lost it. Absolutely lost it. I yelled that Grace was always going through a lot, that he'd always preferred her over me, paid for all her exorbitant clothes and makeup. He'd funded both her weddings out of his own pocket. And for what? For her to be dumped by her husbands because she was an idiotic ass with no personality beyond being a stupid Barbie doll. Dad looked exasperated. He said there was nothing he could do but help her. She was in a very bad place. This bad place. She's had 2 divorces by 25. Her first husband was Dad's friend's son, Luke. They married when she was 20, he was 28. He was done with her within a year. I was young, thankfully kept out of the details. Dad and his friend are still on good terms. But Dad's been pissed with Grace ever since she married again 2 years ago. This guy, Andy, nobody in the family liked him. He just gave everyone the absolute ick. I don't know what she saw in him besides his money, which he definitely had, but he was just weird and disgusting. Even my parents, who love money, couldn't stand him. Things went south fast. He was a serial cheater. He knew he could get away with it because Grace was so obsessed with the money and luxury. He just had to buy her off. Mom and Dad hated him and tried to get her to leave, but she refused. Said she couldn't bear another failed marriage, she'd make it work, no matter what. Well, what it took was another woman that he got pregnant, and then he left Grace for her. So she came back home. That was a year ago. It's been horrible for me, and especially for Kelsey. Now that my parents realize their project, Grace, has failed, they've started eyeing Kelsey. They try to get her to listen to them, but I've done my part well. I've trained her not to fall for their manipulation. I know their tactics. Grace, for her part, is miserable. And in all honesty, I don't really want to pull her out of it. I know being divorced twice by 25 is a lot to take, but I can't feel bad for her. I never liked her, and I don't think I ever will. Anyway, Dad told me his focus was Grace. Again. All his energy and money would go to her again. And in hindsight, I don't even know why I was surprised. He told me I needed to be understanding. I wanted to scream, but I thought it was futile. Then he said something that made all that simmering rage inside me burst to the surface. He told me that since I knew how bad things were for Grace, and because I had a full ride to university, I was practically sorted. So he wanted me to give all the money I had earned to him, so he could use it for Grace. And use it for what? Cosmetic surgeries. Because she felt her husband's left her because she wasn't pretty enough. I have never heard a more ridiculous proposition in my life. Never felt so much anger. I honestly don't know how I didn't slap my father that day. I just started screaming. I don't remember what I said, but I know it wasn't sweet or nice. It was nasty. I was verbally spewing fire. His audacity was unbelievable. I told him he had ruined my entire childhood with his stupid notions, and that's why he had failed both Grace and me. I told him Grace was an unemployable piece of crap because they never let her develop any personality or hobbies beyond being beautiful and having a husband. That's why they felt guilty now, and why they'd pander to her every whim, just to feel less bad about themselves. I told him there was no way he was touching a single penny of my money, especially not for Grace's glow-ups. He was surprisingly calm. He said he understood my frustration, but it was time to stand by my family and do the right thing. I told him he'd led by example. If he'd never done right by me, how could he expect me to do the right thing? I'd never seen the right thing in my life, only favoritism and partiality. If he wanted me to let go of all that, just like that, it wasn't going to happen. I told him I was a fool to expect him to help me, and he was a fool to believe I'd give money for Grace. Then I stormed out of the room and broke down. I was so frustrated. Logically, I knew I could take a job and survive college, but to hell with logic. I was broken. The fact that no matter what I did, what I achieved, how I behaved, I was never going to be worthy enough for my family. It finally hit home. There were 2 children in that house. One was a young woman who never did well in school, got married twice, divorced twice. She never lifted a finger, never wanted for anything, and had one job according to my parents: stay married. She couldn't even do that. Then there was me. I don't even remember the last time I was stress-free, truly happy. Always studying, working, or looking for work. More than the money, it was about proving to my parents, especially Dad, that I was a good kid. Doing what they wanted, hoping they'd love me in return. But it never happened. And I knew then it never would. Grace was their favorite, and nothing could change that. I knew I had to do something, and fast, to save myself and Kelsey. I didn't know who to turn to. My uncles. Useless. They'd sympathize, but Dad would just rebuff them, and it would all fall back on me. The only people Dad listened to, the only ones who could talk sense into him, were my grandparents. They were the only ones who could put an end to this crap. By this point, I didn't even want Dad's money. I'd reconciled myself to doing everything on my own. No, I was out for blood. I wanted the world to know what really happened behind those closed doors, who my father truly was. Little did I know, one call to my grandfather, and everything would change. Had I known the influence Grandpa had over Dad, I would have called him years ago. I called Grandpa and told him everything. Every single detail. The part where I worked only because I wanted to prove myself. Apparently, my parents told everyone I wanted to work, and they tried to stop me. I told him about the scholarship, Dad's refusal to help, and finally, Grace's cosmetic surgeries and Dad wanting my money to fund them. It was a long, hard call. I had a feeling Grandpa hadn't understood half of it. He told me to calm down, and that he wanted to meet in person. I agreed. We met at his place the next day, an hour away. I repeated everything. He didn't interrupt, didn't say much. When I was done, he just asked me what I wanted. I said I wasn't sure, but I was sick of the bias, the neglect. He told me I had nothing to worry about. He would take care of everything. That was last week. Nothing happened immediately. Dad kept pressuring me for the money. Mom started emotionally blackmailing me. But I wasn't going to budge. I knew Grandpa was going to show up. And I knew he was going to blast the daylights out of Dad. I trust him. I just couldn't wait for it to happen. I needed my vengeance, my justice. Update 1. Guys, the blow-up happened. And it was much worse, or rather better, than I ever expected. I honestly never thought it would circle back like this, but hey, I am not complaining. My grandparents came over and called a family meeting. Dad thought it was just one of those regular gatherings, lunch. Then we'd all go our merry ways. Boy, was he wrong. It started with Grandpa asking Dad what his plans were for Grace. Mom mumbled something, but Dad said Grace wanted to enroll in college and they were contemplating what was best for her. Everyone knew that was a lie, but Grandpa wasn't in the mood to play games. He straight up asked Grace what courses and colleges she was looking at. She had nothing. She just stared blankly at everyone. Caused so much confusion, so much embarrassment. Dad's face was beet red. Then Grandpa turned to me and asked about my college plans. I told him about the full scholarship, but mentioned I had no help for living costs. He looked at Dad and made a face. Dad pretended not to see it. That's when Grandma chimed in. She didn't ask if Dad would give me money, but how much. Dad stammered that they hadn't discussed it yet. That's when I spoke up. Actually, we did discuss it, I said. And he completely refused to help me out. Grace kicked me under the table, but I didn't care. This was coming out. Dad started laughing nervously, saying it was just silly banter between father and son. My mother was glaring at me. If looks could kill, I'd be 6 feet under being eaten by insects. I retorted that it didn't look like banter to me. And he'd even asked me to give up all my savings to fund Grace's cosmetic procedures. Grandpa banged his hand on the table. He asked Dad if it was true. I think Dad was too stunned to lie. He just immediately said, yes. The entire room went silent. Grandpa, bless his heart, gave a lingering look to every single person there. He has a flair for the dramatic, and it worked beautifully. He asked Dad why he was behaving that way. Dad had no answer. Then he turned to Mom and asked how she was okay with such blatant partiality. She had nothing to say either. Then he stood up. He said that since the parents in this situation chose to stay quiet, he had no option but to take things into his own hands. He revealed he had set aside a $300,000 inheritance for the 3 of us, which he'd intended to divide equally. But he said, since my parents were focusing all their energy and money on Grace and none on Kelsey or me, he was forced to rethink this division. He said he would be leaving $30,000 for Grace, and the remaining $270,000 would be divided equally among Kelsey and me. My jaw dropped. $135,000. That's insane money. I never asked my grandpa for more money, so I don't know why he made this decision. But when he said that, oh, hell broke loose. Grace started yelling, screaming that she never knew there was so much money. And it was unfair that she was getting peanuts while Kelsey and I got so much. Grandpa just told her, all your life you've been getting so much while Kelsey and my name were getting peanuts. You didn't protest then. Dad tried to chime in, saying this wasn't fair, that Grandpa was discriminating. But Grandma promptly cut him off. We're not discriminating, she said. We're just being fair. It was you and Mom's name who started the discrimination. We're just trying to make things better for the 2 other kids you treat like crap. She also added that none of this would have happened if they'd been good parents and understood how a family should function. Dad then said there was no need to punish Grace for a crime she didn't commit. She should have her full share. Grandpa got quiet. He was still civil, but I think Dad's relentless defense of Grace and his refusal to apologize triggered Grandpa to no end. He said, actually, Dad's name, you're right. I heard Grace breathe a sigh of relief beside me. The real culprits here are you and Mom's name, Grandpa continued. And poor old Grace isn't to blame. So, he declared, the inheritance set aside for Dad would also now go to Kelsey and me. I could literally see all the color drain from Dad's face. It was evident he hadn't thought this through. Too bad for him because Grandpa clearly had. Dad quietly said Grandpa couldn't do it. And Grandpa just said, "Watch me." It was a dead-ass Chad move. Honestly, that man has my respect. He said he had nothing more to say and they would be leaving. He warned Dad not to hound Kelsey or me because we were not to blame. He had done what he thought was right, and if Dad tried to manipulate or harass us, Grandpa said he could go a lot lower. I think Dad is genuinely terrified. He hasn't said a single word to us since Grandpa left. Kelsey's a kid, she doesn't fully grasp the magnitude of what happened. But I know Dad is petrified Grandpa will follow through. Mom has been trying to talk to me, but I'm just avoiding her like I've done my entire childhood. Now suddenly I'm the hot thing in the family, and everyone's sucking up to me, even Grace. I told her to piss off. She was the last person I wanted to talk to. I'm just so glad Grandpa has cut them off. Now they're finally going to face the consequences of their actions. As for me, that's a lot of money. I know I'm going to be set for life with that kind of head start. I don't have to worry about college, and I don't have to worry about after college either. This is just a small update. I've left for college. Leaving home was bittersweet. Kelsey hugged me and cried, and I cried too. I know it's going to be really difficult for her there. I know my parents are going to try and manipulate her. I've told her to tell me everything that happens in the house, and she promised she would. I can only hope I can do enough to save her, and not let her get brainwashed by the idiots I have to call my parents. Grandpa said I can use part of my inheritance for living costs, and I'm so grateful to him. I told him I'd probably still get a job because for me, it wasn't really about the money. It was more about the lack of acceptance, the neglect I faced from my parents. All that rage was just a cry for some kind of support. He said he respected my decision, and that I was much more of a man than his own son. But he also said he wanted me to enjoy life, because responsibilities and duties will always be there, burdening me. So we reached an agreement. I'll try working, and if it strains me or doesn't work out, I won't hesitate to reach for that inheritance, because it's mine by right. I thanked him, and both of us cried a little. I don't think I'll end up using the inheritance. I don't even mind working. Just feels so incredibly nice to have someone support me. To have someone to bank on financially, yes, but more than that, psychologically. I guess I've missed this feeling my entire life, and it's all very overwhelming for me now. What would you have done in my place? Have any of you ever had a family member who just completely shocked you with their entitlement? Tell me what you think, I really want to know.